The podcast you are about to hear is an account of the tragedy that befell 10 youths, in particular, Sally Hardesty, her invalid brother Franklin, Aaron Hardesty, and her boyfriend Kemper. The biggest tragedy of all is that they were very young, but had they lived very, very long lives, they would not have expected, nor would they have wished to see any of the mad and macabre they would have fallen victim to that day. For them, an idyllic summer afternoon drive became a nightmare. The events of that day would uncover crimes so bizarre that the acts and the perpetrators would live in the annals of American horror for decades. These are the killers of the Lonestar State. This is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Welcome back to Let Me Be Frank, a podcast about movies. As usual, I am your host, Frank, and I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for giving me your most precious commodity, which we all know is your time. And ladies and gentlemen, it is time. I have been waiting for this to start for a couple months now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the month that horror built. And I am beyond excited because I get to talk about my favorite genre of movie for an entire month because we are doing non-stop horror all the way through Halloween. And ladies and gentlemen, we are starting with one of the movies that ignited my love for horror, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But we're not just covering the 1974 version. This episode is going to be the first of many. Remakes versus originals, old versus new, past versus kind of present. Today, we are doing a direct comparison between the 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the 2003 Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And we're going to see which one actually comes out on top. Now, usually the originals are always better, especially when you go after a movie that has been as highly praised. But I don't know. We're going to find out. This is how it's going to work. We're going to do intros for both. We're going to do main storylines for both. We're going to look for the differences, and we're going to see if those differences made the movie better, worse, any ridiculous plot holes, things they left out, stuff like that. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time, ladies and gentlemen. Every time I jump between movies, I will tell you, and we will always start with the original because it's the original and that makes sense. So, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974. The movie opens with one of the best entrances to any horror movie I have ever watched. Inspired the introduction for this show, and it's just yellow words on a black screen, but the person talking, their voice, their tone, their pace, their cadence sets the tone for the movie. It's very solemn, and that's what you're going to experience throughout this film. Next thing was the shutter noise that you also heard in the intro. That sound is synonymous with this movie, this franchise. And then we begin to hear digging, like somebody's digging in a grave. And we'll find out why later. It also sounds like someone's opening like a coffin. And then during the intro, we're hearing this radio broadcast about grave robbers. So it opens up with our 5 characters. We have Kurt, Pam, Sally, Franklin, and Jerry. Now, the first time watching this movie, I noticed that, well, it's kind of hard to not notice, but Franklin is in a wheelchair. So, the first time I watched this movie, which I was probably way too young, like most of us are when we see these kinds of movies, I had an inkling that that motherfucker wasn't going to make it through the movie. Usually, people with a disability, especially one that prevents them from getting up and fucking running, usually takes that early L. Now, I didn't know how long he was going to last in the film. I just knew he wasn't going to be a part of the final frame. I knew he was going to be dead by the end of the movie. But I digress. It opens up with the kids in the van driving through Texas. You hear a bunch of stories about grave robbers, so they go to Sally and Franklin's grandfather's grave site to make sure that he hasn't been disturbed. Then they continue on their journey and they stop at a gas station. They try to get gas, but the gas station doesn't have gas. They tell the gas station owner where they're going, and he tries to talk them out of it. He is trying to get them to stay. They continue to Sally's and Franklin's dad's house. On their way there, they pick up a hitchhiker. We don't actually figure out his name. He's just referred to as the hitchhiker. See, I have specific rules. If you are a hitchhiker and I am driving past you, you are all the way out of luck with me. I am not picking you up. No, 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 no. I do not pick up hitchhikers. You are federally fucked if I am driving past you and you got your thumb out. It turns out that he works at the slaughterhouse that they just passed, and he's acting really weird the entire time he's in the van. The hitchhiker and Franklin talk about head cheese, which is absolutely disgusting. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's you take an animal's head, like a cow, and I believe you put it in a pot. You remove the tongue, and I believe the eyes possibly, and you put the whole thing in there and you boil everything off. Then you take the skull out and you add seasonings and whatever and bone up the teeth. Yeah, disgusting as fuck. Soon the hitchhiker gets slightly offended by something Franklin said and pulls out a razor and cuts him on the arm. So before this happens, Franklin's playing with this little pocket knife. And without even asking, the hitchhiker takes it, tells him it's a nice knife, and then proceeds to cut his own fucking hand open. Yeah, batshit insane. That's why I don't pick up hitchhikers. So he cuts his hand open. Everybody, so Jerry's driving, Sally's sitting, riding shotgun. Franklin's chair is more in the van. It's right behind the driver's seat, and Kirk and Pam are sitting behind Sally. Now, everybody but Jerry, because he's the driver, is looking at the hitchhiker. So he takes the knife, he cut his hand open, and now there's blood running down his hand, and he gives the knife back to Franklin. Then he proceeds to take a picture of Franklin. Franklin does not want to pay for the picture because it's a shitty picture. So the hitchhiker, takes, it looked like gunpowder or something, out of a sack with some foil, sat the foil down, put the picture on top of the foil, took the powder, put it on the picture, and then lit that shit on fire in the van. This is when they proceed to kick him the fuck out, but not before he's able to cut Franklin down the arm with that dirty ass straight razor. I'm pretty sure, I believe this took place in 1973. That's when it happened in the movie. I hope that tetanus shots were around then. Spoiler alert, not that Franklin's gonna need one, but just saying. So they end up kicking him out the van. As they're pulling off, he's kicking the side and he smears his blood on the side of the van. And Jerry goes, "That's the last time I ever pick up a hitchhiker." Now that's going to conclude the intro for this movie. So that kind of sets the tone. The vibe that you get when the hitchhiker is in the van is this feeling of unpredictability, that you don't know what's going to happen next. And that's kind of the theme throughout the whole movie, is that they want you to not feel comfortable, that you can't predict what these people are going to do or what's going to happen next. So now we are going to go into the introduction for the 2003 opening for this movie. Now, mind you, the 2003 version is significantly longer of a movie in general than the original. So there's going to be a lot more things to talk about with the remake. So the movie opens with an amazing opening, much like the original, but this one includes a police investigation. The evidence that they collect evidence, which includes a police walkthrough of the Hewitt residence. So they kind of gave them a last name. As they conclude the opening, we meet our five characters. We have Aaron Kemper, her boyfriend, Morgan, and Pepper, who they just picked up the day before, and Andy. So they are the couple. So if we're comparing them to the originals, Kemper is the driver, the boyfriend of Aaron. There is no person in a wheelchair because honestly, that shit doesn't make sense. But that Franklin spot, that kind of windy bitchiness, is going to be taken up by Morgan. And then our couple, quote unquote, is Pepper and Andy. They take the place of Kirk and Pam. They drive down a dirt road in Texas on their way to a concert after coming back from Mexico. One of them alludes to the fact that they may have 2 pounds of marijuana in the van. Aaron is not happy about this because she doesn't want to be a drug smuggler. So Aaron takes Kemper's word when he tells her there's no weed in the vehicle. They briefly kiss. Mind you, Kemper is the one driving, and they almost hit a young lady walking down the road. They pull over, and she is clearly in distress. She looks like she hasn't had water in days. She's very pale with blood all over her. Aaron and Pepper get out of the vehicle to go check on the girl. She says she just wants to go home, so they put her in the van, and now the four friends are staring back at her while Kemper's driving, much like the original characters did. This hitchhiker notices that they're going the wrong way. They passed a meat packing place, like a slaughterhouse, and she begins to freak out. And she's saying she won't go back. So she grabs it. They eventually push her back in her seat, and she's kind of just hunched over crying. And then she opens her legs slightly and then reaches up towards her vaginal area, and she pulls out a little 6-shooter. She pulls out a gun from between her legs. She looks at them and says, "You're all gonna die out here." She puts the gun in her mouth and blows her fucking brains out. This scene was absolutely crazy. They're trying to get answers out of her to try and figure out what's going on. Why, like, what happened to you? Like, they're trying to help her. She's not really giving almost any information. Now, this, instead of like in the first one where you get this immediate unpredictability because you have this wild man, there's this huge air of concern that they're walking into something that they don't really know if they can handle. And then when she kills herself, that sends everything into a frenzy. Now, the camera work for this was actually very coolly done. If I can, that's not a word, but we're going with it. As she shoots herself and she blows out the back window, we get the view of everyone screaming, and then the camera slowly draws back to her hand that had the gun in it falling out, and then we go through her mouth, through her now the exit wound, and then out the back window as her head falls backwards. And now we are looking at the van from the rear as Kemper slams on the brakes. Everybody jumps out of the van. Pepper gets out and throws up. The everybody's beside themselves. Like, this is a panicked situation, and that's gonna conclude the introduction for this one because they're about to hit the same point with a little bit of differences. So we're gonna go back to the 1974 version, and we're gonna pick up right after the intro. They get to Sally and Franklin's dad's house, and of course it's abandoned for quite some time. So it makes it a lot harder for Franklin to be able to move around. They invited Franklin on this trip and just kind of left him alone, like knowing that he can't get around that well, which I thought was pretty fucked up. The four of them are kind of browsing the house, and then one of them, I believe it was Kurt and Pam, wanted to go swimming. So they asked Franklin where was the swimming hole. He gives them the directions, and they go on their way. So once Kirk and Pam get down there, they discover that the watering hole has been completely dried up because it's Texas and in August and it's probably well over 100 degrees. And off in the distance, they hear a generator. Now, they needed gas, which is why they stopped at the gas station, duh. But the gas station was out of gas, like I said before. So they hear a generator going. So Kirk and Pam go to the house to see if they can borrow gas to get them to a gas station. That way they can, he was planning on leaving collateral. They're having a conversation while they go there. And they just start walking all over this person's property, which I wouldn't do. When they get to the house, they're knocking on the door. So the front door is open, but the screen door is closed. And they are yelling into the house, trying to get someone to answer, and no one does. And instead of just taking their L and heading back, Kirk decides to walk his ass up in somebody else's house. He don't know who these people are. They could have 1,000 guns, they could have whatever. And he ends up just kind of walking in the house and walks around. He hears what he thought was like a pig squealing, which would assume that someone was home. So he walks towards the back of the house. So as you walk in, there's a room to the right, there's a room a little bit more to the left, there's a door straight ahead, and to the right, there's stairs going up. He walks past the stairs, past the room on the left, towards this open door. Now they have this like little ramp on the floor, but it's like I can't really describe it. It has these little ridges on it that would make it easy to trip. I wouldn't have that in my house because I would trip over it like he did. He trips and stumbles. When he looks up, Leatherface, this is our first showing of him, is standing there with a hammer over his head and hits Kirk across the head. Kirk hits the ground, instantly starts bleeding. Then he begins convulsing on the floor. Leatherface grabs him, drags him into the next room, grabs the handle to the metal door, and slams it shut. Now we're gonna pause right there, and we're gonna go to the 2003 remake to see what they did after the intro. So one of the big differences is now they're driving with this dead girl in the back of their van, and they stop at a gas station with all this rancid meat to try and get the person, the owner, whoever's working there, to call the sheriff. The person working there is not much help at all. She's taking the place of the gas station guy in the introduction of the 1974 version. So after she gets off the phone with the sheriff, this is what happens. The sheriff asks them to meet him at the old Crawford Mill. They wait around for the sheriff, but he's taking a really long time to show up. They're getting frustrated because they want to be done with the whole situation. Morgan wants to just leave the body and move on. Aaron and Pepper don't want to do that. So they put it to a vote, and Kemper decides they're going to stay and wait for the sheriff. He was the swing vote. Then something runs past the opening of the door that they're sitting by. Aaron believes that they're just making it up to try and get her to leave. She then goes to investigate the old Crawford Mill. And as soon as something scares her, she calls for Kemper and the rest of them come. They find out that it was actually a possum inside of a locker. But then they also discover that there was a child. This place seems to be where the child kind of hangs out. His name is Jebediah. They talk to Jebediah for a little bit, and he points out that the sheriff is probably home getting drunk. Aaron and Kemper go to the house, and this house, so in the original film, it kind of looks like a normal house. It's just off in the middle of fuck ass nowhere. In this version, the 2003 remake, there is no road that goes to the house. You have to drive through the woods to get there, which instantly gives you this feeling of extreme seclusion. Like if something happened here, ain't nobody finding you. Now, this house is much bigger than in the original, which gives it this almost like prison like feeling. It has stone slabs, very few windows. To me, it doesn't look like a very comfortable place to live. And like I said, it looks like a big ass prison. Like once you go in, if they don't want you coming out, you ain't coming out. When they knock on the door and yell inside, much like they did in the original film, someone actually answers it. And it's an old man in a wheelchair with no legs. He allows Aaron to come in the house to call the sheriff, but not Kemper. After she makes her phone call, he asks for her help. His wheelchair is laying on the floor while he's emptying out what looks like to be his catheter. Meanwhile, Kemper doesn't know where she is and he goes inside looking for her. After looking around for a bit, he walks into a room with a TV playing a black and white cartoon. He drops something on the floor that he was fucking with on the door. As he bends over to pick it up, we get our first look at Thomas Hewitt, also known as Leatherface. Now, mind you, both Leatherfaces are big. I believe the one in the original film was about 6'4". This guy is 6'7", over 300 pounds. So his presence on film is very intimidating. Kemper, much like Kirk in the original, gets hit in the back of the head with a hammer, and then he is dragged behind a gigantic steel door. And when this one slams, because the one in the original was kind of like, I would say like a little flimsy kind of door, like if you had a ram or something, you can knock it down pretty easily. This one was like closing a fucking prison cell. If you don't want someone getting in there and you shut that door, they ain't getting in. So when he slams this gigantic door, it makes a loud sound. Aaron hears it, goes to look for Kemper. The old man says he is not in here, even though he's lying. Meanwhile, Pepper, Morgan, Andy, and Jebediah are waiting for the sheriff, who finally arrives. Jebediah is no longer there. Pepper is relieved to see the sheriff shows up, but her relief is quickly turned to worry after they actually meet Sheriff Hoyt. His attitude is very abrasive, and you can quickly tell that he is not there to help anybody. He wraps up the dead body to get ready to leave with it. Now, mind you, he is an asshole to these kids the entire time. He cops a feel on the dead body. He is not someone you want to run into. Anyone who's seen this film knows that he is a bona fide fucking psychopath. So going back to the 1974 version, once Pam hears that same door close, she goes inside the house and she stumbles around into a room that is completely covered in feathers and bones of animals and humans. And now we're kind of understanding that these may be the people who are doing the grave robbing, because their chairs, lampshades are made out of human skin, lamps made of bones. They have an entire couch that's made up of like people's fucking rib cages. I don't know how sturdy any of this shit is, but it is not a room that you would walk into and feel comfortable. And as she tries to leave, all of a sudden that same metal door slides back open and Leatherface is standing on the other side. Now she's wearing flip-flops. So she tries to take off and run, and she makes it just outside the screen door. When Leatherface grabs her around the waist, she ends up kicking off her flip-flops, and she is dragged back inside. She's taken into the kitchen where Kirk is now laying on the table, dead. Leatherface turns her around, picks her up like a baby, kind of under the arms, and he hangs her on a meat hook that is hanging in their kitchen. I can imagine this being excruciatingly painful, to have all of your body weight hanging you off of a meat hook. And she is forced to hang there as he begins to cut her boyfriend into pieces in front of her, knowing that ain't nobody coming to help her. And this is where both of these films start to take a turn away from each other. Now, there's going to be little things that the 2003 remake does that kind of keeps them together, but because this movie is so significantly longer than the original, because all the deaths in the first one, they happen very close together. Like once Kurt goes in the house, then immediately Pam goes in, and then in the next couple scenes, Jerry goes looking for them. And we're going to get into what happened to Jerry right now before we move on to the 2003 version. So next, Jerry goes down to find them all dead. He makes it into the kitchen. The table's already cleaned off. Pam is no longer hanging from the hook, but he hears banging on a freezer. And when he opens it, she pops out and she's like, kind of flopping around because she's gravely injured and she's been stuck in a fucking freezing cold freezer. Jerry tries to turn and run, After he turns around, he sees Leatherface standing there holding up a hammer once again, and all he has time to do is scream before his fucking head's cracked open. You see, these deaths they're very, very quick. Sally is not watching her friends die. She just knows that every time one of them leaves, they're not coming back. So now her and Franklin are standing there waiting and waiting and waiting for her to come back. So this is what happens to Franklin. Franklin takes the most he takes the most expected L in the movie. He and Sally are both waiting by the van, calling out Jerry's name, who we now know is not going to answer. Neither are the other two. Franklin and Sally take off into the woods to try and find Jerry. Now, this is incredibly difficult for them to accomplish because it is pitch black. It's now night and it is pitch black, and she is trying to push her brother, who is in a fucking wheelchair, through like deep woods. They're not on some whatchamacallit. They're not on a path going through the woods. They're literally in brush. And she is trying to push this wheelchair. And mind you, Franklin is no small man. Franklin's a big boy. He's a heavy person. This was all bad. All of a sudden, they hear a noise in the woods, and all of a sudden, Leatherface is there. Chainsaw in hand, he revs it up, and guess who dies? Damn sure ain't Sally. It's the motherfucker in the wheelchair. He cuts Franklin up, and Franklin is now out of here. So this is what I mean. A lot of the stuff that happened in the original was very, very quick. The remake, on the other hand, they take their time and they do a bit more psychological torture. So we're going to hold off on the end of the 1974 version, and then we're going to compare the endings because there's a lot of deviation in this next part. So back to the 2003 version. Aaron makes it back to Pepper, Andy, and Morgan to ask if the sheriff has shown up yet. They said he did, and he took the body. Then she asked them, "Where's Kemper?" And they look at her like, "Chick, what the fuck? He was with you." So Andy and Aaron go to find Kemper while Pepper and Morgan stay behind. Aaron takes Andy back to the house that she just left. She goes to distract the old man who's now sitting outside of the house. He gets in, somewhat undetected. I believe Leatherface may have known that someone was in the house. While Andy is inside, he ends up knocking something over and makes noise. Aaron hears this and runs inside, and the old man in the chair is not far behind her. The old man is incensed that someone's in his house. They kind of just broke in. Then he has this fucking smile on his face, and he tells them, "You're so dead you don't even know it," which leaves Aaron and Andy confused because they're like, "Dude, you're in a wheelchair. Like, what the hell are you really going to do to us?" And then he starts to challenge Andy, telling him, like, "Bring it, come on." And Andy's very confused. But the old man starts banging his cane on the floor, just kind of slamming it down over and over again. Now, mind you, they haven't seen Leatherface yet. So he's doing this, and their backs are to that gigantic metal sliding door. All of a sudden, that door flies open, and there stands Leatherface, all 6'7", 300 and something pounds of him, with a dead person's mass, like face on his, and the chainsaw in his hand. Aaron, they take off running towards the front door. Aaron is able to to create some distance, but Andy is not so lucky. He falls on the floor in the house, but he's holding one of those 4-star tire irons, which helps him not initially get cut up by Leatherface. They run outside. They both make it out. Aaron books it. Aaron is me. She takes the fuck off. Meanwhile, Andy starts running. They have like sheets hanging outside. Andy starts running through the sheets that are hanging. Leatherface is right behind him, chasing him, running through the same thing. All of a sudden, he disappears from behind him and ends up in front of him. And as Andy's running, Leatherface is able to cut his leg off with the chainsaw. Blood goes everywhere. He hits the ground. Leatherface picks him up, carries him back in the house. He's screaming for Aaron. He's trying to dig his nails into the wall to stop them from moving, but that doesn't work. His nails end up coming off of his fingers, and that is all we're going to hear from Andy for a little bit. Meanwhile, Aaron runs back to Pepper and Morgan, who are cleaning up the van. She tries to take off, but the van won't start because she's panicking. Then, out of nowhere, the sheriff pops up. He asks him if there's any trouble with the van, and Aaron's asking for help. It seems like he's trying to be helpful until he sees a marijuana roach in the ashtray. He gets furious and orders them out of the van and to lay down on the ground on their faces. We quickly cut to Andy sitting on the floor with one leg missing. Leatherface picks him up, carries him over to the meat hook, and hangs him from the meat hook. So he is now taking the place of Pam. Lucky guy. He then takes salt. It looks like salt. And he places it on the open wound, the missing leg. And then he gets like something you would wrap meat in, like that brown paper, and he covers the wound, Leatherface does, and then ties it off. Now, this next section, because there's no sheriff in the original, this is completely unique to the remake. The psychological torture in this film is beyond anything. So, here we go. This is not in the original at all. This is only in the remake. Sheriff Hoyt has Pepper, Aaron, and Morgan face down in the dirt. Aaron is pleading with him to go and help Kemper and Andy, but the sheriff is too busy yelling at them. Aaron gets up, and the sheriff fires 3 shots into the ground in front of them to keep them in place. He then forces Morgan to get up and get in the van because he wants Morgan to show him exactly how the girl died. Now, this scene when Sheriff Hoyt and Morgan get in the van, it's very tight. Everything is really close in together. They're sitting face to face. They're in the van. The door is closed. There's not a lot of space between them. And the camera shots are very tight, which gives you this really intense scene because you know that he, the sheriff, the person that's supposed to serve and protect, is the only quote unquote help that's going to come. They are on their fucking own. This town is desolate. It seems like this family are the only ones there. When Morgan sits, he sits slightly to the side so that he's not sitting in the exact spot where the girl died. The sheriff wants an exact recreation of what happened, so he forces Morgan to sit in the spot where the girl dies. Now you can see a lot of panic on Morgan's face. At first, he was a bit like, this is bullshit. Like, he's scared, but he's still more angry than scared. By the time he forces him to move over, he is now quivering with fear. The sheriff takes out the gun that the girl used to kill herself and puts it in Morgan's face. He tells him to take the gun and he pulls back the hammer. The hammer, for those of you who don't know, is the part of the revolver that causes the gunshot. He then wants him to demonstrate how she killed herself. When Morgan places the weapon under his chin, the sheriff says bullshit. The sheriff forces Morgan to put the barrel of the gun in his own mouth. He then tells him that no one has ever fired a gun without putting their finger on the trigger. So he also forces Morgan to put his finger on the trigger. That's when Aaron and Pepper get up to see what's going on. Morgan quickly turns the pistol and sticks it back in the sheriff's face. Pepper is screaming for him to kill the sheriff, which I was too. Fuck that. Get rid of him. The sheriff is taunting him, telling him he doesn't have the balls to do it, and Aaron is pleading with him not to kill the sheriff. Eventually, Morgan does pull the trigger, but the gun is empty. Everybody goes quiet and the sheriff smiles. Then he pulls out his service revolver, which we all know is loaded, and sticks it in Morgan's face. And then he orders Morgan out of the vehicle and starts ushering him towards his police car. Aaron and Pepper attempt to follow, but the sheriff turns and yells at them, points the gun in their face. Then he forces Morgan into the back seat and takes off with Morgan, leaving the girl standing there. He then gets on his radio and notifies someone that the girls are good to go as he drives Morgan back to the house. As the sheriff drives through the woods and pulls up to the house, the backlighting behind the house makes the residents look even more inescapable, even more ominous. During this drive, he's talking to Morgan about where they were going. They were on their way to a Leonard Skinner concert, and the sheriff makes a comment that he likes Skinner, and he said he was taunting him, saying, "Well, what are you going to do with your tickets now? Because they're not making the show." Morgan offers the tickets to the sheriff. He calls bribery, and mind you, this whole time the sheriff's drinking alcohol out of a glass bottle. He smacks Morgan in the face with the bottle, breaking the bottle and knocking out some of Morgan's teeth. Yeah, this sheriff and this middle sequence is fucking nuts. He's just as bad as Leatherface. He then pulls Morgan out of the vehicle and proceeds to beat him up before forcing him in the house. Meanwhile, Aaron and Pepper are trying to get the van started because the sheriff took the keys when he got out. Aaron ends up hotwiring the vehicle. Once it's on, they think they're safe and they start moving the vehicle. But as they take off, the wheels have been loosened to the point where they fall off as they're driving. Then, out of nowhere, a chainsaw rips through the back window, and that's when the Leatherface attack begins. They attempt to escape the van, and Pepper's the first one out. Leatherface jumps down, chases her, cuts her on the back. As she falls to the ground, Aaron is forced to witness her being cut into pieces with the chainsaw. Aaron then takes off running with Leatherface close behind. For a big guy, this motherfucker got some stamina. She comes upon a small trailer after she runs through the woods. The owners are home. She bangs on the door, begging for help, and is eventually let in. The place looks like something out of the fucking Hills Have Eyes movies. Two grotesque looking women sitting in the living room with not a care in the world, with their living room covered in newspaper. They seem extremely unbothered by the fact that Aaron is in such terror. She's offered tea and is kind of forced to drink it until she just flat out refuses it. She asked them if she could use their phone. They said they do not have a phone because phones are a hassle. A baby begins to cry in the back of the trailer. One of the women goes to check on the baby as Aaron visibly starts to feel woozy. We can tell that something's wrong. She hasn't picked up on it yet. Then a phone begins to ring, and the woman that went to check on the baby answers it. Aaron says, "I thought you said you didn't have a phone." And she turns to leave and passes out, falling on the floor. So this is the equivalent of when Sally gets captured by the gas station person, which we're going to get into. She is awakened by the sheriff pouring beer in her face. She begs to be let go, but it falls on deaf ears. Leatherface's mother, who's the woman who runs the gas station, then calls him in to get rid of the girl because she's making too much noise. He takes her to the basement and just throws her down the stairs. She gets up and sees Andy hanging from the hook, barely alive. Aaron tries to get him down, but he's too heavy and wounded to be helped. He begs her to end it, to kill him, and she picks up this big ass knife. This goddamn Crocodile Dundee. That's not a knife. This is a knife. Big ass sword looking thing, and shoves it in his stomach. And I'm like, girl, could you not have picked something else or stab him in the heart? Something that won't hurt. Why'd you plunge this big ass knife into his stomach? Good Lord. She then walks around and sees Morgan, who is also severely wounded, sitting in a bathtub with his back slit open. She begins trying to wake him up and get him out of the tub when Jebediah, of all people, shows up to help them escape. Leatherface sees this, runs to stop them. He flings open the basement door with the chainsaw in his hand as Aaron has to drag Morgan as far as she can. They eventually get out and make their way to this like old house where where Leatherface cuts the door open, and he chases them until they disappear into the house. So Aaron puts Morgan in a closet while she hides in a different area. Leatherface goes in looking around but can't find them until Morgan adjusts the door for whatever reason. Leatherface goes to inspect, but when he does, Aaron looks out of his little small hole while simultaneously like smacking rats off of her lap. And this makes a noise. The rat makes a noise. Leatherface believes he knows where she is. He goes around behind her and, in his best RoboCop impression, punches through the walls and drags her out the other side, throws her down, and he's about to start the chainsaw. He's kind of like standing on her back almost, and he's revving up the chainsaw. That's when Morgan, of all people, saves his friend because he's been trying to get the fuck out of Dodge since the beginning of the movie. He saves Aaron from being killed, which causes his own death. Leatherface picks him up, hangs him from a chandelier, and then cuts him in half the wrong way, starting below. Yeah, he jams the chainsaw into his dick. Yeah, there's no other better way to put it. He cuts him in half and then chases after Aaron. So none of that we just went through was in the original film. That sequence of events is what causes this movie to be a little bit longer because let me go back in my notes here. Right after Franklin is killed, we go into, I think it's like the final 30 minutes of the movie. So all of that we just heard from the remake is about 30-ish minutes that adds to this runtime. So now we're going to get into the conclusion of the 1974 Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and we're going to compare the endings, and then I'm going to read this ending, then we're going to read the ending for the remake, and then we're going to discuss and give thoughts. So, mind you, just as a reminder, Franklin was just killed in the woods. And Sally, and just like that, Sally is the final girl. She runs so far that she ends up back at the gas station from earlier in the movie. Turns out the owner of the gas station is also a part of this. He knocks her out with a broomstick, ties her up, and proceeds to take her back to the house. This is where her nightmare kicks into full gear. The gas station guy turns out to kind of be one of the leaders and makes them bring down Grandpa. So there is no Grandpa in the remake. They hold a straight razor to her throat while they cut her finger and open and place it in Grandpa's mouth for him to drink her blood. It's a very gross scene as Grandpa twitches almost like he's dancing in his seat until she ends up passing out from just shock and fear and dismay and all of that. She then wakes up at the dinner table, screaming and flailing, but there's nowhere for her to go. As she screams, Leatherface and the hitchhiker scream and howl along with her. We see lampshades made of people's faces, chairs with actual human hands and bones, all of that stuff. She's definitely gonna have to go through some therapy for a while to heal from this. She pleads for her life. The hitchhiker just mocks her. She asks the cook, because that's the gas station person, he's known as the cook, for help. The scene is very chaotic. There's a lot of yelling. It's unpredictable. You have no idea what they're planning on doing. I don't even think they know what they're planning on doing. And you know for a fact that there's no one coming to save her because they're in such a secluded area. The cook, the gas station guy, says that he doesn't take any pleasure in killing. He eventually tells them to stop torturing her and leaves the room for them to do whatever they're going to do. Eventually, the hitchhiker tells Grandpa, who can barely move on his own without them like literally moving him Weekend at Bernie style, that he should be the one to get the kill because apparently he was the killer in his day and he was one of the best. They place Sally on her knees with her hands behind her back and her head over a bucket. They put a hammer in Grandpa's hand, which he can't even hold. They tell her it won't hurt after he attempts to hit her. It's safe to assume that he was a killer at the slaughterhouse before it closed down. After a few non-fatal blows with the hammer, Grandpa is still unable to kill Sally because he's so fucking old. She snatches away from the hitchhiker and jumps out the front window. And a very iconic scene of her jumping out the window. She runs down their long ass driveway towards the road with the hitchhiker close behind, followed by Leatherface with his chainsaw. It is now daylight, so they've been torturing her all night. Luckily, she was passed out for a good chunk of the night. As she runs towards the road, the hitchhiker catches up to her. He slices her back a couple of times, but he's unable to really catch her. He can't catch all the way up to her. He just gets close enough to hit her with that nasty ass straight razor. They're running along the road as a truck carrying livestock approaches, and the hitchhiker is hit and run over and killed by the truck. The truck driver attempts to help Sally, but he's even thrown off by this chaotic ass scene unfolding around him because he's just trying to do his motherfucking job. So he tries to help Sally get into the vehicle, but Leatherface is too close and they both have to take off running. And the truck driver he grabs a wrench and throws it at Leatherface while he gives chase, hitting him in the face, causing Leatherface to drop the chainsaw on his own leg. Just then, a blue pickup truck pulls up and does a U-turn with Leatherface close behind. She jumps in the bed of the truck, covered in blood, screaming hysterically. Leatherface swings the chainsaw at Sally, but misses. As the truck pulls off, she is scream laughing as she is finally saved from this maniacal family. The ending scene is Leatherface swinging the chainsaw in circles as the sun rises over the house, and then the movie ends. So the ending of this movie is a very iconic scene. He's Leatherface is just squealing and screaming and spinning in circles with, one handing the chainsaw with the sun coming up over the horizon behind him. And Sally is screaming, covered in blood, but she also kind of looks like she's laughing. I don't know. That poor girl gonna need a lot of help. But that is how the original one ended. It's a very abrupt ending. It's a very quick movie. But now we're going to jump into the final act of the 2003 remake. And then we're going to talk about it at the end. Aaron is now on the run again. While giving chase, Leatherface drops the chainsaw on his leg, just like in the original. She ends up at the old meat factory, which we can assume is the slaughterhouse, the one that they passed that the girl freaked out about in the beginning of the movie. Leatherface soon makes another appearance, and how his big ass is able to move so fast and quietly, I have no idea. Erin devises a plan. She takes a pig and puts it in a locker, then makes a bunch of noise to get Leatherface to come back. When he goes to inspect the locker that appears to be moving, he revs his chainsaw and opens the locker to see a pig come out. He immediately knows that the sound probably came from behind him, and as he turns around, Erin pops out with a meat cleaver, chopping at his arm until it comes completely off. She then takes off and runs, finding a way out of the slaughterhouse. Erin runs until she comes upon a road with a truck driving down it, as at this point it's raining like dumb hard. She gets in the way of the truck, causing it to stop. After getting into the truck, the driver is asking her all these questions. And just like the young lady did in the beginning, Erin says, "I just want to go home." She sees the sign for the barbecue gas station that they stopped at in the beginning. Much like the girl in the beginning of the movie, she begins to freak out. She jumps, she doesn't jump, she reaches for the steering wheel, causing the semi truck to almost jackknife. He eventually gets the truck stopped and he jumps out of the vehicle to go inside the business to get help. Inside the gas station is the sheriff, his mother, also Thomas's mother, and Henrietta. This is the first time we learn her name, and it's the thin woman from the trailer with the baby. Aaron already figured out that that baby does not belong to the woman, so when the truck driver goes to get them, Aaron sneaks out of the truck, steals the baby, and leaves out the back door. Then we see Aaron trying to hotwire a vehicle again as the sheriff goes out to inspect the truck. So this scene is actually pretty cool because she's trying to do the same thing that she did earlier with the wires as the sheriff is trying to look in the vehicle to see if he can see her. And she's trying to hurry up, hurry up. He's slowly walking towards the driver's side door where we assume that she would be hunched over under the steering wheel trying to get the vehicle to start. When he finally gets to the truck, the door of the truck, he flings it open. There's no one in it. It turns out that Aaron was actually in his police car hot wiring that vehicle, which made more sense because he wasn't walking up to that vehicle just in time. Just so as soon as he opens the door and sees that she's not in there, he looks to the right, which would be down the side of the trailer, to see his own vehicle flying at him. And much like the hitchhiker, he gets run over. Except Aaron does the smart thing. After she hits the sheriff and runs him over, she then puts that car in reverse and runs over him again. Then she puts the car in drive and runs over him again. The sheriff is dead. He's dead, 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 dead. He's not coming back. So after she runs him over a couple times, she then starts to take off. And just when you get that little bit of feeling of relief, the chainsaw revs, hits the vehicle. She freaks out, panics, but she manages to keep the road straight. And there's Leatherface. One hand. How did he get the chainsaw started? Plot holes, people. But the chainsaw's on. He hits the vehicle, and then as it drives off, he doesn't do the little twirling thing. He has this like death look on his face, like, bitch, if I ever caught you, it would be the worst time of anyone's life. And Aaron, with the baby, successfully gets away. But that is not the end of the movie. What happens at the end is we cut back to that police walkthrough of the crime scene. So in the beginning, he's going down the stairs and they're talking, and then we cut and we start doing the movie. Now they are looking around his living space, Leatherface's living space in the basement. All of a sudden, we hear kind of like a growl and a roar, and the police officers are attacked. And then we have that voiceover that comes from the beginning, comes back and says that the crime scene was not properly secured. They didn't actually make sure that there was no one in the house, costing those officers their lives. And all they have is like one still frame of Leatherface attacking the officers. And they say that the case remains open. Movie ends that way. And that's going to conclude both movies. Hopefully, this format wasn't too jumbled up. I will definitely be working on this format a little more to make it a more concise. But judging both movies, act for act as much as we could, with one being so much longer than the other, as much as I love the original, this remake was amazing. From the dynamic of the family to the look of Leatherface to the house to the helplessness to what Aaron actually went through as opposed to Sally, not comparing trauma, but the fact that Aaron had to not only kill one of her friends, but she had to watch majority of them die as she ran away from everything, as opposed to Sally, who knew that people were being killed. She only witnessed her brother's death, and everybody else she just knew was gone. In my opinion, I actually like the remake a bit better than the original, but these are still two classics. But in this battle, at least for me, the original is just slightly under. So I'm giving the win to the 2003 version. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to conclude our first battle. This was fun. I hope you enjoyed it. We got a long month coming. We got a lot more horror to talk. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Stay safe.